I'm John Heilemann.
And I'm Mark Halperin. With all due respect, that dentist from Minnesota, if you're thinking about lying, you might want to think about running for public office. On the show tonight, 2 candidates and 1 advisor. But first, Donald Trump tops the news again today, defending his past comments about breastfeeding unearthed in a deposition by the New York Times. Add to that his remarks, now famous, about Mexican immigrants and about prisoners of war. And there's the new flap over his divorce. Given all that, the question is Trump done? Hardly. Take a spin with us in our WADR time machine and look at other candidates who've had bigger flaps. In '92, Bill Clinton survived all the negative press around the Gennifer Flowers and draft dodging stories that threatened his campaign. A decade later, Arnold Schwarzenegger won a recall election in California when he was running for governor, even though the press reported that he had groped women and said he admired Hitler's rise as a public speaker. So, John, back to the present. As the Oppo arrows fly against Donald Trump, what, if anything, can and will pierce his Teflon?
Well, Mark, I think, there's a chance. No, I shouldn't say there's a chance. If Donald Trump were to be proven to have done something illegal, like broken the law in his past, that might. Something that was outright racist, like using the N-word, that might. Or if Spy Magazine was restarted by Kurt Anderson and Graydon Carter, that might. Other than that, it's not clear to me what, other than Trump himself, could do to pierce his own armor.
People say, well, the accumulation of these stories will eventually catch up with him. Some people say somebody's going to unearth something from his past that's really bad. I don't think Trump is going to have all great days, and the McCain thing maybe roughed him up a little bit. But in terms of his core supporters, in terms of playing by the normal rules, subject to the normal physics of politics, I think it's going to take a lot for negative stories driven by opposition research or press digging to hurt Donald Trump. It's going to take a lot.
Well, then we agree. I just think it's true. The guy is more or less, I just said, they would have to take some very severe things driven in those ways. I think that the biggest thing that could hurt Donald Trump is not the press digging, not opposition researchers digging. There is some chance that he himself will do himself some kind of significant damage. I can't imagine what that would be, but I think it almost has to be self-inflicted because he is so impervious to normal attacks.
Yeah. Other candidates would be killed by things he walks through so far. All right. Trump is heading to Scotland to attend the Women's British Open golf tournament. That's being held at Trump Turnberry Golf Course through the weekend. Earlier today, before leaving for Scotland, in an interview in Gotham City, Trump told the Daily Mail that former Texas Governor Rick Perry shouldn't be on the main stage of the Fox debate next week in Cleveland. Today at the Yale Club in New York, the same Daily Mail reporter who interviewed Trump asked Perry to respond to what the Donald said about him.
He said you don't belong on the debate stage on August 6th. He questioned your energy, toughness, and quote-unquote brain power that it might require to run a successful campaign.
Let's get a pull-up bar out there and see who can do it.
So you see Steve Forbes and others on the stage there in the room. They loved that response. So, John, with all eyes on the first Republican debate, the question I have for you is, did Perry, with that response, lay down the right marker, kind of a template, for how Republicans should deal with Trump when he attacks them?
Well, it's as good an idea as any. I think this question is on everyone's mind who works for a Republican candidate right now who's going to be on that debate stage. It's easy to say, well, we're just going to ignore him. We're going to focus on our own issues. We're going to focus on ourselves. Christie today with me said something similar to that when we were chatting about it. But God knows, if Trump starts attacking people, you can't ignore him. You got to parry somehow. And Rick Perry may have shown the best way to parry with humor.
He did. Not just humor, but disdain. It's showing disdain for Donald Trump is going to fire up some of his supporters. But if you're trying to build your own support, I don't think there's any doubt that Perry, short, aggressive, a little bit personal, and making no question about how he feels about Trump. I thought it was very effective. And as I said, in the room, you saw not just Steve Forbes, but Kudlow and others there all thought it was a great answer. It really helped him, I thought.
And literally, if you don't do anything, if you just try to ignore Trump, you know what's going to happen the next day. He's going to make mincemeat of you, not just on the debate stage, but the following day for not having fought back against him, he's going to call everyone weak for ignoring him. They got to do something.
Yeah, Perry showed good instincts. I bet other people learned from that. All right, after Perry's speech at the Yale Club, and they did a Q&A with the audience, I caught up with him and asked him about Wall Street, the economy, Hillary Clinton, and his own childhood dreams.
Hey, Governor, how are you? Can I talk to you for just a second? Sure. So, first question is it true that every boy grows up in Paint Creek wanted to speak at the Yale Club? True or false?
I'm not sure any boy who grew up in Paint Creek knew where the Yale Club was, or even Yale University for that matter.
Talk about what you think Americans think of Wall Street now. What's the sort of general view?
Yeah, I think that Americans are a bit distrustive, if you will, that Wall Street is this place where only those that have the right connections, those that are the moneyed interests, those that have the ability to have a lobbyist to protect their interests, and it shouldn't be that way, and it historically hadn't been that way. As in my remarks, I talked about that Wall Street is the engine that's driven America's success, whether an entrepreneur or innovators, and it can get back to that again, but we need to have smart regulation. I'm not saying we need more regulation. As a matter of fact, we need less regulation. It just needs to be in the right place and focused in the right areas so that you have the right outcomes.
You've been pretty clear about what you think about the president's job on the economy. Would Hillary Clinton be worse on the economy than Barack Obama, or you think about the same? Or?
Well, if we can just take some anecdotal snapshots, if doubling the capital gains tax is worse than Barack Obama. So in that case, I would say worse.
That's Rick Perry today here in New York City. Coming up, Chris Christie in New Hampshire on Mike Huckabee, Donald Trump, and Chris Christie. John talks to him after this word from our sponsors.
Earlier today, up here in New Hampshire, in Manchester, I caught up with Chris Christie, who was doing an event at the University of New Hampshire talking about foreign policy. We sat down after that event. We talked about foreign policy and a whole lot more. Take a listen. So you spent a lot of time up here in New Hampshire.
Yes, sir.
You've proudly been boasting, and I think it's actually probably true, that you are at this point the most substantive candidate in the race in the sense of detailed policy prescriptions. Do you have any sense that that is breaking through with voters? And if so, what is that? Where do you get that evidence?
Just the town hall meetings. John, it seems like people have taken the time to read some of the stuff, and they ask really good questions. And I've had any number of people come up to me and say, thanks for answering my question directly. They won't necessarily reference something they've read, but they'll say, thanks for answering the question directly. And that's the substance I'm giving them. So that's the kind of anecdotal evidence. I don't think we'll all really know about whether this approach was successful or not until February 9th. But I think it's the way I'm comfortable doing it, and I think it's what we need to do for the country.
You had an ad last week where you talked about, you did a foreign policy ad, and some of that came up just now in this event you did today. And you talk at the end of that ad, the quote, I believe, is, I'll read it for you here at the end. You make this point. You made it on stage here, too. You said, President's top priority is to protect the United States of America, and I'm the only one in this race who has had at least some small part in that responsibility. And you talk about your role as U.S. Attorney.
Yep.
Do you think that you have better national security credentials than any other Republican in the race?
I think I have different ones. Mine are specifically focused on terrorism and the intelligence and law enforcement effort to interdict terrorism and to try to make sure that attacks don't happen in the homeland. So I don't have necessarily better than everybody else, but I have different ones that they don't have.
You say that you are the only one who had played at least a small part in the protection of the United States. So that you're saying that none of the 4 U.S. senators you're running against has had any role in protecting the United States?
No, not a real role. No.
Right. So Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, all those guys, none.
Well, I know which ones are the senators. Yeah. I mean, my view is that the legislature debates these things and discusses these things. I'm not saying they don't know anything about it. I'm talking about the role that somebody like me in that type of executive position had versus one who's marking up a bill in a subcommittee. Yeah. I think that's a real difference.
You talked a lot today about Iran and the Iran deal, which you're very critical of, and you said at one point, you talked about it was disastrous for Israel, this deal. One of your fellow candidates, Mike Huckabee, the other day also thinks it's disastrous for Israel, and went so far as to say that the president was leading Israelis up to the door of the ovens, gas ovens. How do you feel about that comment? Do you think it's that disastrous for Israel? Do you agree with Governor Huckabee?
I don't agree with the hyperbolic nature of the comment, and I also think that it's somewhat offensive to Israelis. Israelis have a right of self-determination, as I said up there today too, and they have the right to defend themselves. No one's going to lead them anywhere. Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Knesset are going to make a judgment about what they want to do to protect Israel's national security. So I thought it was kind of off-key in a number of different ways, and something that I wouldn't have said. As you know, I have severe concerns about the agreement, but I would not have used that kind of language, because not only because I think it's too hyperbolic, but also because I don't think it acknowledges appropriately the role that Israel has in its own self-determination for its own national security.
Do you think that kind of hyperbolic language is not constructive in terms of the kind of debate we need to have on substance?
I think it's distracting.
It's distracting.
It allows the president then to do what he did in Africa, which was talk about the statement rather than be pinned down on the specific deficiencies of the agreement. We should be only talking, in my opinion, about the specific deficiencies of the agreement as we see them, and forcing the president to respond to those. When we say things like Governor Huckabee said, we give the president an out. And you saw what he did in Africa yesterday. That's all he wanted to talk about.
Sure.
And so that tells you two things. One, it wasn't a smart statement to make politically. And two, substantively, the president can't defend the agreement.
Let me ask you a couple of political questions, obviously. We are a little over a week away from the first Republican debate. There was a fantastic quote, I believe, tweeted by the chief strategist for another candidate, John Kasich's chief strategist, John Weaver, who said that if you imagine what it'd be like for a NASCAR driver to be preparing for a race in which you knew that one of the other drivers would be drunk, that is what preparing for a debate with Donald Trump is like. That's a pretty good quote.
I don't agree with it, but
you don't. In what way?
No,
why not?
No, because I just think that all this attention and focus on Donald Trump is misplaced, and I've said that a number of times. And so, for Governor, I can't believe that's what John Kasich thinks. I know John Kasich. John Kasich's not worried about Donald Trump walking into this debate. He's worried about John Kasich, and I'm worried about Chris Christie and communicating my message. So. That's why I try not to listen to political consultants too much, because they say stuff like that, and then John Kasich is going to have to answer to that.
You
said, think Donald Trump's a drunk? I mean, come on.
You were asked by a voter yesterday, I believe, about Trump, and I know you're generally not liking to talk about Trump much.
If voters ask me, I'll answer.
But you said on the record, you said to this voter that he hurt the credibility of the party. And
I said no, that's not what I said, and that's the way it was reported. What I said was that when he says things like, we don't need to do any Social Security reform at all. I'm going to make everybody so rich they're not going to need to worry about Social Security. Then I said that, like, my view on it, knowing Donald, he's smarter and better than that. And he could come up with a plan to deal with Social Security. He could come up with a plan to deal with immigration. And that's why I've said all along about Donald, he's going to be as serious a candidate as he wants to be. So what I said was he hurts the credibility of his potential presidency by saying stuff like that. And that's what I meant. I don't think he has any effect on the party at all. I don't think any of us have any effect on the party at all, unless and until one of us is the nominee. Then we speak for the party. Then we got to be concerned about not only the effect of the words that come out of our mouth on us, but on the broader party and down ticket. Right now, I don't think anything that Donald Trump says today is going to affect down ticket in 16.
All right, I got one more question for you. I actually have two, but we don't have time for the longer one, which would have to do with marijuana, where you and I would have like a fist fight over this issue, so I'm not going to do that.
Why don't you do that one? Because I'd love to have a fist fight. It'd be really great.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another one, though. All right? I was shocked when I saw, given the choice between Bruce Springsteen and John Bon Jovi, that you sided with John Bon Jovi. I got nothing against John Bon Jovi.
Right.
But as I understood it, you were the ultimate Springsteen fan.
I am a huge Springsteen fan.
And there are those who are now saying in the headlines that this is the biggest flip-flop of Chris Christie's career.
It's not.
Explain this, what's happened here.
Because John's a friend. And the way I interpreted what Laura was asking me was, if you had to choose between Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi, not their music, but choose between them,
Oh, well, then now you've opened the door.
Sure, John's become a friend over the last few years, and so and Bruce I have a cordial relationship with.
Right.
We know each other. We've worked on some things together. But John and Dorothea have become friends of mine and Mary Pat's, and so Mary Pat and I answered it the same way, even though I've been to 124 Bruce Springsteen shows, and I think I've been to 4 Bon Jovi shows. So from a music perspective, Bruce is in my history, but John's become a friend.
But I'll ask you the question then. Desert Island Discs, right? If you were going to an island and you could only take the catalog of one or the other, who would you take?
Catalog?
You could take the catalog or one or the other. You pick. Springsteen or
well, I would
Bon
take
Jovi.
Springsteen.
Okay.
Right, so everybody kind of misunderstood my answer. I understood the question from Laura Ingraham to be a personal question. And Mary Pat and I both answered it quickly, immediately, the same way, because John and Dorothea become friends. But if I was going on a desert island and I could only take one set of music, I've lived with the Springsteen music a lot longer than I've lived with John's music. It's much more evocative of my youth, and so I would enjoy that a lot more.
I want to say, for the sake of history and for the sake of my own well-being, thank you for clarifying that matter.
I'm glad you gave me the opportunity, John, because others would be concerned, I'm sure, as well. America is probably very concerned about that, so I'm glad we straightened it out.
No doubt about it. Thank you,
Thanks,
Governor.
John.
Appreciate it.
Great. Appreciate it.
John and Christie in New Hampshire today. And when we come back, another interview. Bernie Sanders' big advisor, Tad Devine, joins us from Boston after this short break. We'll be right back. Joining us now, Tad Devine. He's a senior advisor to Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, and he joins us tonight from Boston. Tad, thanks for coming back.
Good to be with you, Mark.
Your candidate doesn't like political questions, so I want to ask you something. I don't really want you to answer politically, but substantively. Do you think that Senator Sanders' campaign is having an impact so far on Hillary Clinton and her campaign?
Well, I think so. I think Bernie is taking up space, and I think they're recognizing that. I think he's putting forth a very powerful message, a message that resonates on the issue of income inequality in America. I think it's a central issue of our time. I think he's talking about differences on important issues. Yesterday was about.
But Tad, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what is all that doing to impact her? How is it changing her behavior, her campaign's behavior, as you see it?
Well, I think they recognize now that this is going to be a contested nominating process. I think, they're going to have to deal with a real challenger in the nominating process. And I think, the impact is, listen, they spent $1 million on research last quarter, okay? I assume they spent it on something, and I don't think it was for the general election. So and frankly, while we're not raising as much money, I think we're very proud that we raised $15 million in 8 weeks after he announced. We spent $3 million. We didn't spend 20. So I think that's having an impact on her and her campaign.
Tad, your candidate, Senator Sanders, did an interview with Vox where he said, made a comment about open borders making all of America poorer. That comment has stirred up some controversy and also given some succor to some on the right who'd like to see tighter immigration policies. How does that? What are the political implications of saying something like that for Senator Sanders when he is trying to break out of kind of his all-white demographics and reach across to Hispanic and African-American voters?
Well, John, listen, I think at the heart of Bernie Sanders' appeal is his authenticity, is the fact that he speaks directly and powerfully to voters, that he doesn't, equivocate, that he doesn't beat around the bush. So I don't think it's going to have an adverse impact. I think as he begins to tell his story, which we've started to do, his story on an issue like immigration, he's the son of a Polish immigrant who came to this country barely speaking English. He grew up in a community full of immigrants in Brooklyn. I think that's a door opener for him. And I think Bernie should keep talking the way he's talking, straightforward, using the language he's always used, and I think that will connect with every group, including Hispanics.
Tad,
Tad, it sounds like he has a pretty restrictionist view on immigration. Is that not what that conveys?
No, listen. He supported the president's policies. The use of as much executive authority as possible in terms of helping immigrants who have come to this country. Bernie is someone who is very much has a voting record in favor of supporting finding a pathway to citizenship for immigrants who are here to America. So no, I don't think he is in any way resembling the restrictionist policies of the Republican Party. That's not his plan at all. But his plan is to speak directly and bluntly to the problems that confront America today. I think he'll continue to do it, and I think that's at the heart of his appeal.
Tad, you were quoted in The Atlantic recently. I'm hoping they quoted you accurately. You said, we're speaking of Senator Sanders, I give him advice, not always advice that he follows. He's not interested in the niceties of appearance and hairdo. What's something specific you give him advice on that he hasn't followed?
Well, you may not be surprised to hear that I wish we had spent some money on polling in the last, quarter. Listen, Bernie has a view of this campaign and the way to run it, and I come from a different perspective, which is much more from sort of insider political consulting. And frankly, he challenged me when the campaign began to learn something about grassroots organizing. And I think tonight, for example, when we have 3,000 house parties in 50 states across America, over 100,000 people have responded. It's that kind of challenge that I think is worth responding to. So, listen, I have my ways, and whether it's research or the way we, produce television and things like that, they're a little different than him. And I think we've worked together for 20 years now. I think hopefully we'll find common ground. I think we will.
Don't tell him I asked you this, but have you ever asked him to brush his hair and he declined?
Yes, I have. And he's not, the comb is, we haven't found a great place for the comb in the campaign yet. So, but listen, Bernie is going to be himself. And I think that's at the heart of his appeal. He's authentic. He's real. And I think the campaign we're building is a credible one, not just in the fundraising and the house parties, but for example, this weekend in New Hampshire, we're going to announce a national environmental endorsement. I think people are starting to recognize that Bernie Sanders has a real serious chance. Mark, I think you're one of them, and I agree with what you wrote earlier this week, that he is a serious candidate. He's a real candidate, and there is a pathway for him, if the campaign works out, to win the nomination of the Democratic Party.
Tad, you've worked with a lot of candidates, a lot of national candidates over the years, and you've seen them grow and change and improve. Can you name a couple of discrete areas where Senator Sanders has improved as a presidential candidate since this started?
Yes, he has incredible message discipline. I want to tell you, and I've worked with a lot of people who, would, be, let's call them textual deviants, okay? If there was a teleprompter, okay, they might wander off. But, Bernie, when you sit down and you talk to him about a message to be delivered, particularly some of these political meetings he's been in recent days, people like the AFL-CIO Executive Committee today with the League of Conservation Voters, other groups, if you sit with him and you talk with him about what you're trying to accomplish, he is really, really good at this. And I think, his political skills, which haven't been tested as much outside of the grassroots environment, but in the big political arena, I think are extraordinary. So I've seen him, get very disciplined in terms of delivering message. And I think if we can be successful in Iowa and New Hampshire, and we go to the big campaign where you fly into states, you do events on TV, and then you move on, I think he's going to be tremendous at that.
Tad Devine, learning about grassroots politics at a ripe old age. Tad, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's Tad Devine of Bernie Sanders' campaign. And when we come back, a full-screen promo for our Donald Trump focus group that you won't want to miss after this. Tomorrow, then again on Friday, we'll show you something special, John's focus groups with Donald Trump supporters from St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire. You won't want to miss that. And one late-breaking news item for you today. The former Virginia Governor Jill Gilmore filed papers with the FEC to say he's running for president. That means now 17 Republicans are officially in the race, more than the number of seasons that Family Feud has been in syndication. That's a lot, by the way. Remember, this program's on twice a day at 5 and at 8. Until tomorrow, Trump focus groups and more. We'll see you then. Sayonara.